two strangers, one night. But what if this night wasn't as fleeting as they thought? The city hummed softly beneath a velvet sky, gentle and low, as if it too was holding its breath. Twinkling lights scattered across the skyline, tiny galaxies caught between rooftops and dreams. Mia stood at the edge of the rooftop terrace, a glass of something sparkling in her hand, the cool night air brushing against her bare shoulders, sending little shivers down her spine. She wasn't supposed to be here tonight. Not really. A last-minute invitation from a friend. A borrowed dress that floated around her like mist, and a heart quietly hoping for something she couldn't name. The rooftop was alive with music, not loud, but rich and slow. A jazz band tucked into the corner, weaving gold into the evening. People laughed softly, clinked glasses, whispered stories they might not remember by morning. Mia let her eyes drift over the crowd. Strangers with secret lives, couples with stories unfolding in glances and touches, friends lost in the kind of laughter that tasted of nostalgia. She felt a little invisible, but not in a sad way, more like a star hiding behind a cloud, still there, still shining, just unseen for a while. And then she saw him. Evan was leaning against the railing a few feet away, his dark jacket open at the collar, hands tucked into his pockets, gaze lifted to the stars as if searching for something he'd lost. There was something about the way he stood there, like he belonged to another time, a softer, slower world. Their eyes met, just for a moment, and everything else blurred. No names, no stories, just two souls recognizing something they hadn't realized they were missing. Mia felt her heartbeat shift, a slow, warm ripple through her chest. Before she could think too much, her feet moved toward him, drawn as if by an invisible thread. "Beautiful night," she said, her voice almost stolen by the breeze. Evan turned, a small, real smile lighting his face. "The best kind," he answered, like a secret shared between them. They stood there, side by side, letting the silence between them stretch and breathe. Easy, comfortable. Neither asked for the other's name. It felt almost sacred not to, as if knowing would somehow break the fragile magic blooming between them. Instead, they spoke of other things, of books that had changed their lives, of songs that felt like home, of places they dreamed of seeing, and places they missed even before they left. Each word wove a thread between them, delicate and sure. Each smile stitched them closer. Mia laughed, a soft surprise sound, when Evan confessed he believed wishes made on falling stars only worked if you didn't tell anyone. He laughed too, a little embarrassed, and she thought it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Around them, the party carried on, swirling and glittering, but their little pocket of the night stayed still, untouched. They danced once, not because the music demanded it, but because it felt inevitable. No grand steps, no practiced moves, just two people swaying gently under the weight of a sky full of wishes. Mia rested her head lightly against his shoulder, and Evan closed his eyes, breathing her in, like he wanted to remember the moment long after it was gone. The hours melted away, unnoticed. It felt like they were suspended in time, like the city had exhaled and held them in a quiet pause. When the clock struck midnight and the band played a slow, sleepy tune, Evan looked at Mia with something almost like sadness in his eyes. I don't want to break the spell, he said, voice low and rough. Then don't, Mia whispered, even though they both knew they couldn't stay here forever. The rules of the night, unspoken but understood. No names, no promises, no tomorrows. Just one night, and somehow that made it even more precious. Evan brushed a stray hair from her cheek, his fingers barely grazing her skin, and for a heartbeat, the world stopped turning. Mia smiled up at him, that kind of smile you only give once, and they stood there, holding onto a moment already slipping through their fingers. Above them, a star streaked across the sky, unnoticed, or maybe not. Maybe it was seen, just not spoken of, because some wishes, the ones that really matter, are made in silence. As the night deepened and the lights dimmed, Mia and Evan remained there, together, wrapped in a fleeting forever. A night so soft, so tender, it would live on somewhere beyond time, in the hush between heartbeats, in the breathless pause before a memory, in the quiet knowing that some meetings, even the briefest, are written in the stars. And somewhere deep inside them both, they knew this wasn't the end. It was only just the beginning. The party was unraveling slowly, like a ribbon slipping through careless fingers. The music softened, the candles burned low, and laughter faded into something quieter, almost tender. Mia and Evan still stood together, just a few steps from the edge of the terrace, where the city stretched out below them like a sleeping giant wrapped in silver mist. Neither of them spoke for a long while, letting the cool air weave between them, carrying unspoken things. Mia's hand brushed against Evan's, a whisper of contact, feather light, but it sent a shiver up her spine, and something inside her ached sweetly at the touch. The world around them blurred, softened, the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the soft scraping of chairs against stone. All of it faded until there was only this, only them, and the spaces between heartbeats. Evan shifted, just slightly, his fingers hesitating, before he gently took her hand into his. His palm was warm, steady, anchoring her to a moment she never wanted to end. Walk with me, he said, his voice like velvet dragged across old wood. Mia nodded, unable to find her voice, only the thudding of her heart answering him. They slipped away from the terrace, away from the glow of the party, down a narrow staircase that smelled faintly of rain and stone. The city at night was different, softer, slower, like it had pulled up its heavy blankets and was dreaming just below the surface. Their footsteps echoed down empty streets, but even the echoes seemed gentle, reluctant to disturb the hush. Mia glanced up at Evan, the street lights painting gold across his features, catching the lines of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows, as if he too was afraid the night might vanish if he moved too quickly. Neither of them spoke much. Words felt unnecessary now, like dust on a mirror, unneeded when everything inside was already so clear. A stray cat darted across their path, its paws silent against the cobblestone. Somewhere far off, a church bell chimed the hour, soft and lonely. Mia smiled to herself. It all felt like a dream, stitched together with fragile threads of starlight and hope. Evan led her through a small park, trees standing like sentinels in the mist. their leaves whispering secrets in the breeze. They found an old bench beneath a sprawling oak, worn smooth by years of lovers and lonely hearts, and sat close, not touching now, but not far apart either. Above them, the stars hung heavy and bright, like someone had spilled handfuls of diamonds across a velvet cloth. Mia tilted her head back, breathing it all in. The cold bite of the air, the faint smell of smoke from a distant chimney, the way Evan's presence wrapped around her like an invisible cloak. "This night feels," she began, then stopped, not sure how to finish. Evan turned his head toward her, waiting, patient. "Like it's not real," she whispered, the words trembling into the space between them. He smiled, not the kind you give out of politeness, but something deeper, something that said, "I know exactly what you mean." "I was just thinking the same thing," he murmured, his thumb tracing small circles against the rough wood of the bench. For a long time, they simply sat, breathing together, listening to the soft hum of the sleeping city. And somewhere in the folds of that silence, something fragile and fierce bloomed. Hope, maybe, or the first shy notes of something that would one day be called love. Mia found herself wishing she could bottle this moment, tuck it into her pocket, keep it against her heart for rainy days and lonely nights. But deep down, she knew some things are meant to be lived once and remembered forever, not held on to too tightly. The clock tower near the square chimed again, lower now, heavier, reminding them gently that time was still moving, even if they were not. Evan exhaled slowly, the sound curling into the cold air like a promise he wasn't quite brave enough to speak aloud. "I should walk you back," he said, reluctantly, as if each word cost him something. Mia nodded, blinking quickly, pushing away the sting behind her eyes. They stood, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Evan reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. Mia closed her eyes, breathing him in, memorizing the scent of winter and something she would always think of as him. Side by side, they walked slowly back through the empty streets, the night wrapping itself tighter around them, the stars shifting like watchful eyes above. When they reached the building where the party had begun, the windows dark now, the music silenced, Mia turned to face him. For a moment, they just stood there, wrapped in the unbearable sweetness of goodbye. "I'm glad you came tonight," Evan said, voice low, rough with something that might have been longing, or fear, or both. "So am I," Mia whispered, her heart aching in the most beautiful way. They didn't kiss. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was deeper than that, older, more sacred. A look, a smile, a breath shared in the cold night air. Then, without another word, Mia slipped inside, the door clicking softly shut behind her. Evan stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, as if trying to etch her silhouette into the backs of his eyelids. Above him, the stars pulsed softly, patient and eternal. And somewhere, deep inside him, a decision was made. He would find her again, no matter what it took, no matter how long it took. Because sometimes, one night, one whispered meeting under a sleeping city was enough to change everything. Enough. To begin forever. Days slipped past like slow moving clouds, heavy with things unspoken, heavy with the memory of one night that refused to fade. Mia found herself tracing invisible patterns on her window, watching raindrops race down the glass, wondering if Evan was somewhere, thinking of her too. She didn't even know his name. Not really. And yet, he felt stitched into her ribs now, woven into the quiet moments of her day. She would catch herself smiling at nothing, fingers pausing over a book she wasn't really reading, hearing his voice like a soft echo in the back of her mind. The city kept moving, its streets filled with umbrellas, the buzz of traffic, the blur of neon and mist. But to Mia, it all seemed muted somehow, less real than the memory of his hand brushing hers, the way he had looked at her, like she was something he had found and never meant to lose. She tried to tell herself it had been just a moment, a fleeting spark in the dark, not a story, not a beginning, but her heart, stubborn and tender, whispered otherwise. Meanwhile, across the city, Evan stood in a small bookstore tucked between a florist and a cafe, turning a worn paperback over in his hands, not really seeing it. The smell of old paper and rain soaked into him, and for a moment, it felt like he might turn a corner and she would be there, laughing softly, brushing hair from her face, wearing that look, that half smile that made everything inside him quiet and wild all at once. He hadn't asked her name, a rule they had both agreed on, whispered under falling stars. But now it haunted him. Because how do you find someone when you don't even know what to call them? Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't over. Not yet. Evan walked the streets they had wandered together, his hands deep in his coat pockets, passing the park bench where they had sat, still slick with rain now, the oak tree dripping steady tears onto the empty wood. He paused there, tipping his head back, letting the rain kiss his face, letting the cold remind him he was still here, still waiting, somewhere. He was sure of it. She was waiting too, across town. Mia curled up in her tiny living room, wrapped in a worn blanket, a mug of tea cooling on the table beside her. She opened her journal, pages filled with half thoughts and tiny dreams, and she wrote it, the boy with rain in his voice and galaxies in his eyes. Her pen hovered, hesitating. Then, on impulse, she drew a small star beside the words, a secret between herself and the universe. Maybe, just maybe, the universe was listening. The next morning, the city woke under a gray sky, mist clinging to rooftops, the streets slick with memory. Mia wandered through a local market, hands stuffed into her coat sleeves, weaving through the crowd without really seeing anyone, until she passed a stall selling old records, and something tugged at her. There, tucked between jazz albums and forgotten folk songs, was a record, its cover worn and faded. Songs for a Rainy Night, it read. Her fingers brushed over it, heart thudding for reasons she couldn't explain. On a whim, she bought it, slipping it into her bag with a shy kind of hope. Meanwhile, Evan stood in line at a small cafe, waiting for a coffee he wasn't sure he even wanted. The door chimed behind him, letting in a swirl of cold air, and for a wild, breathless second, he thought he felt her there. He turned sharply, scanning the faces, but it was no one he knew. Of course, it was no one he knew. Still, The feeling stayed, curling into the corners of his chest, refusing to leave. He took his coffee, and on a napkin, he found himself sketching without thinking. A star, a bench, a girl laughing under misty streetlights. And when he looked at it, really looked at it, he smiled because he knew he wasn't crazy. She was real, and somehow he would find her again. Maybe it would take days or weeks. Maybe it would take 1,000 tiny chances stitched together. But he would wait. Some meetings, after all, aren't accidents. They're promises whispered into the fabric of the universe. And sometimes, if you're patient, the universe answers back. Outside, the rain softened into a fine mist, the city breathing slow and deep beneath a silver sky. Mia stood at her window, the record spinning quietly, a slow, crackling melody filling the room. And as she leaned her forehead against the cool glass, eyes closed, heart wide open, she whispered into the mist, "Find me." And far across the city, Evan felt something stir in the air, something gentle and insistent. He smiled. Somehow, he knew he would. The days that followed moved like slow river currents, soft, steady, filled with little pauses that hung in the air like notes from a forgotten song. Mia spent more time wandering, finding herself in places she couldn't explain. Bookstores with crooked shelves, cafes with flickering candles, parks where the leaves fell in golden spirals to the ground. It was as if the world itself was tilting, guiding her somewhere she couldn't yet see. And Evan, he moved through the city like a man chasing a shadow, following half-formed memories, clinging to the shape of a laugh, the ghost of a gaze. Neither of them knew it, but they were circling closer, steps drawing invisible lines on a map written only in dreams. One evening, just as the last of the daylight melted into violet dusk, Mia ducked into a small antique shop she had never noticed before. The bell above the door gave a soft, tired chime, like it had been waiting a long time to be heard. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and time, of stories stacked on dusty shelves, of wishes wrapped in velvet ribbons. Mia wandered slowly, fingertips brushing over forgotten treasures, music boxes with chipped paint, silver picture frames with smiling faces lost to history. In a corner near the back, something caught her eye, a small glass star hanging in the window, spinning gently with the breath of the wind. It wasn't perfect. A tiny crack ran through one side, a flaw that somehow made it even more beautiful. Mia stepped closer, her breath fogging the glass, her heart giving a soft, uncertain flutter. She didn't know why, but she felt it, deep in her bones. This was meant for her. Meanwhile, across town, Evan found himself standing outside a bookstore long after closing, staring at the window display without really seeing it. And then something glinted in the corner of his vision. Across the street, a small antique shop, its windows glowing warm against the blue evening, and in the window, a star, spinning slowly, casting broken rainbows on the worn floorboards inside. He crossed the street without thinking, pulled forward by something he didn't have a name for. The bell chimed as he entered, soft and slow, like a sigh. The shopkeeper, an old man with kind eyes and a sweater that looked older than the shop itself, nodded silently as if he had been expecting him. Evan wandered deeper into the shop, the air humming around him, thick with a quiet kind of magic. And there, he saw her. Mia stood by the window, fingers gently reaching toward the glass star, her face tilted slightly upward, her hair catching the last of the fading light like a halo. Evan stopped breathing. It was her, the girl with rain in her laugh, with stars in her eyes, the girl he hadn't even known he had been waiting for, until he found her. Mia felt it too. She turned slowly, her hand falling away from the star, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, standing in the warm hush of an antique shop, wrapped in the fading gold of twilight. Neither of them spoke. Words felt too small, too clumsy for what stretched between them. Instead, Evan reached into his pocket, pulling out something he had kept without quite knowing why. A napkin, crumpled and soft from days of being carried, with a sketch, a star, a bench, a girl laughing under misty streetlights. He held it out to her, his hand shaking slightly. Mia looked down, her lips parting in a silent breath, and then she smiled, slow and bright, the kind of smile that could crack open even the coldest night. Without a word, she reached into her own bag, pulling out her journal, flipping to the page she had written days before. The boy with rain in his voice and galaxies in his eyes. She showed it to him, her hands trembling just a little. Their eyes met, and it was like the universe itself leaned in, holding its breath, waiting. Slowly, Evan stepped closer. "So," he said, voice low, a little rough. "Are we still pretending we don't know each other?" Mia laughed, a soft, musical sound, the kind that wrapped around your ribs and stayed there. "I think," she whispered, "I think the rules have changed." Outside, the mist thickened, streetlights glowing like faraway stars. Inside, two souls found each other again, not by chance, but by design. The cracked glass star spun in the window, catching the light, throwing tiny constellations across the walls. And somewhere deep inside both of them, something clicked into place. Not the loud crash of fireworks, but the soft, certain click of a key finding its lock, of a heart finding its home. They spent hours wandering the shop together, pointing out strange objects, making up stories for them, laughing at nothing and everything. At one point, Evan found an old typewriter, its keys worn and sticking. He typed a single line, laughing when the ink smudged. "Found you." Mia laughed too, then leaned over, typing right below it. Finally, the shopkeeper watched from behind the counter, smiling to himself, humming a tune only he seemed to know. When they left the shop, the sky had deepened to navy blue, the city wrapped in mist and mystery. Mia tucked the glass star carefully into her bag, feeling like she was carrying a piece of magic home with her. Evan walked beside her, close enough that their arms brushed now and then, sending tiny electric shivers through her skin. They didn't need to talk much. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, warm, alive. As they reached the corner where their paths would split, Evan hesitated. Mia looked up at him, her heart pounding quietly in her chest. And in that soft, trembling moment, he asked, "Can I see you again?" Mia smiled, a smile that lit up the fog and the night and the thousand invisible threads that had brought them here. You already are, she said softly. And Evan knew. Some moments, some meetings, they aren't meant to last just for one night. They are written in the stars, waiting patiently for the right hearts to find them. The next few days passed like soft pages turning in a worn, beloved book. Days that drifted by gently, full of small smiles, lingering thoughts, the warm ache of anticipation. Evan couldn't stop thinking about her. The way her laugh curled in the air like smoke. The way her eyes had shone in the fading light, like two tiny lanterns trying to guide him home. Mia found herself daydreaming at odd hours, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, scribbling little stars in the margins of her journal, smiling at nothing and everything. They had exchanged numbers that night, shyly, fingers brushing, cheeks flushing pink under the antique shop's warm light. And now, tonight, was the night they would see each other again. Evan spent far too long standing in front of his closet, holding up different shirts, wondering absurdly if blue made him look more trustworthy. He ended up wearing something simple, something that smelled like clean laundry and autumn air, something that felt like him. Mia pulled on a soft sweater, the color of early morning mist, and a long scarf that trailed behind her like a secret. As she tucked the little glass star into her pocket, her heart gave a small, delighted flutter. Outside, the evening wrapped the city in a velvet dusk, streetlights blinking to life, one by one, casting golden puddles on the sidewalks. The air was cool, but not cold, carrying with it the smell of fireplaces, fallen leaves, and the faint, almost sugary scent of roasted chestnuts from a vendor on the corner. They had agreed to meet at a small park by the river, a quiet place, tucked away from the buzz and clatter of the city. Mia arrived first, standing under a tall oak tree whose leaves shivered softly in the breeze. She held her hands together, not out of cold, but out of the giddy, nervous energy that danced just under her skin. Evan spotted her from across the street. For a moment, he just watched her, the way her scarf played with the wind, the way she shifted from foot to foot like she was trying not to float away. He smiled, a slow, helpless kind of smile, and then he crossed over, each step steady, sure, like walking towards something he had been searching for without even knowing it. Mia, he said softly as he reached her. She turned, and there it was again, that look like the world had tilted just a little in the right direction. Hi, she breathed, her voice a little shaky, a little bright. For a moment, they just stood there, two people stitched together by invisible threads, feeling the weight and wonder of it settle around them like a second skin. And then Evan held out his hand. Come on, he said, smiling in that way that made the edges of the world blur. I want to show you something. Mia hesitated only a second, then slid her hand into his. Warmth flooded through her, quiet and complete. They walked along the river path, under canopies of branches tangled with tiny lights, their reflections dancing on the slow-moving water. Evan led her to a small, tucked-away spot where the trees opened up to reveal a little clearing, and beyond it, a perfect view of the city skyline, twinkling like 1,000 wishes tossed into the night. Mia gasped softly, the sound pure, full of wonder. It's beautiful, she whispered, Evan looked at her. Yeah, he said, voice low. It is. But he wasn't looking at the city. Mia blushed, feeling his gaze like a soft hand on her cheek. They sat down on a worn wooden bench, the old kind that creaked slightly under their weight, like it remembered 1,000 other love stories whispered into the dusk. They talked about nothing and everything, about favorite books, about places they wanted to see, about the way certain songs felt like memories they hadn't made yet. Mia found herself laughing more easily, leaning into him without even realizing it. Evan listened like no one ever had, like every word she spoke was a tiny treasure. And when he spoke, she felt the depth in him, a kindness carved by time, a quiet hopefulness that made her chest ache in the best way. As the night deepened, a gentle fog began to roll off the river, curling around them like a soft, secret blanket. Mia shivered slightly. Without thinking, Evan slipped off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Their fingers brushed, and for a heartbeat, everything else fell away. The city, the river, the ticking clock of the world. All that remained was the tiny space between them, charged and tender, fragile as a soap bubble, beautiful as a first snow. Slowly, carefully, Evan reached up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Mia's ear. Her breath caught. She looked up at him, eyes wide, lips parted just slightly. And in that quiet moment, under a sky dusted with stars and mist, he leaned in. Their kiss was soft, almost hesitant, like a question asked with trembling hope. Mia answered by leaning closer, her hands finding the fabric of his shirt, holding on like she never wanted to let go. It wasn't the kind of kiss that sets fireworks off. It was better. It was slow, warm, the kind that wrapped around your heart and whispered, "You're safe here. You're home." When they finally pulled apart, they rested their foreheads together, breathing the same soft, misty air. Evan laughed quietly, the sound vibrating against her skin. "I was afraid this wasn't real," he whispered. Mia smiled, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. The good kind, the kind that come when your heart is just too full. "It's real," she whispered back. "It's real." They stayed there long after the world had gone quiet, wrapped in each other, in the promise of something new, something rare, something that didn't need names or labels or promises, just two hearts finding their way home. One evening meant for two, and the start of something forever. The night stretched out before them like a quiet, endless road, dotted with tiny, flickering lights of possibility. Evan and Mia sat for a long time, letting the silence between them settle, comfortable and rich, like a favorite old sweater you never wanted to take off. Finally, Mia lifted her head from where it rested lightly against his shoulder, her eyes sparkling with a mischievous glint. "Let's make tonight our own little fairy tale," she whispered, the words catching on the cool mist of the air. Evan turned toward her, eyebrows lifting, a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice low and curious. Mia's fingers played with the edge of his jacket, tracing invisible patterns. "Let's pretend the city is magic," she said, her voice full of wonder. "And everywhere we go tonight, we find a new piece of it, a new little miracle." Evan laughed, the kind of laugh that melted into the night like a secret. "I'm in," he said, without a second's hesitation. Hand in hand, they set off, hearts light, footsteps quiet against the cobbled path. The park opened up into narrow streets, winding and sleepy, with old lamplights that buzzed softly overhead, casting golden halos onto the pavement. Their first miracle appeared just around the corner. A stray cat, white as snow, with eyes like polished amber, sat perched atop a fence. It regarded them with the slow, unblinking calm of a creature who had seen too much and cared for none of it. Mia knelt down, whispering softly, hand outstretched. To their amazement, the cat leapt down, landing silently, and pressed itself against Mia's legs, purring like a tiny, living engine of warmth. Evan watched, heart caught somewhere in his throat, as Mia laughed, cradling the cat in her arms, her face lit with a gentle, golden joy. After a few minutes, the cat slipped away, disappearing into the fog, leaving behind only the lingering echo of its warmth. They grinned at each other. First magic found, Evan murmured, and Mia nodded, her eyes dancing. They wandered on, weaving through quiet streets, where the world seemed to have folded in on itself, soft and hushed. A little further on, they stumbled upon an old bookshop, its windows still lit despite the late hour. Inside, books were stacked in towering, precarious piles, like some sleepy dragon's hoard, drawn by invisible threads. They pushed the door open, a tiny bell above them, giving a sleepy jingle, the scent of paper and leather and time wrapped around them, welcoming them in. An old man sat behind the counter, reading a thick, worn novel, his glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up, smiled a smile that crinkled the edges of his eyes, and simply nodded at them, as if he had been expecting them all along. Mia wandered through the aisles, her fingers trailing lightly over spines faded with love. Evan found a shelf marked Lost and Found Stories, a label handwritten on a crooked little sign. Without thinking, he plucked a small, unassuming book from the shelf. Inside the cover, written in an elegant, looping script, were the words, "To those still searching, may you find exactly what you didn't know you were looking for." He showed it to Mia, who smiled so wide, it made Evan's chest ache in the most beautiful way. They left the shop with the book tucked under Evan's arm, and a feeling like they had just been given a secret too precious to speak aloud. More miracles followed, a musician playing an old violin under an arched stone bridge, the notes weaving through the fog like silk, soft and aching and full of something ancient and sweet. A street artist, painting tiny galaxies on scraps of paper. He handed Mia a piece without a word, a swirl of purple and gold and midnight blue, with a tiny silver heart tucked into the corner. They found a tiny cafe still open, its windows glowing like a beacon in the night. Inside, candles flickered in jars, and the walls were strung with fairy lights and old records. They ordered 2 mugs of hot chocolate, topped with mountains of whipped cream and little sugar stars. Sitting by the window, they talked quietly about nothing urgent, about everything important. Mia told him about the summers she spent by the lake as a child, how she used to collect fireflies in glass jars and pretend they were wishes. Evan shared how he once stayed up all night to watch a meteor shower, lying on the hood of his car, feeling like he could fall into the stars if he wasn't careful. Each story unfolded between them like soft cloth, weaving them closer, stitch by invisible stitch. As they finished their drinks, Evan pulled something from his pocket. It was the tiny glass star Mia had tucked into his hand the night they met. He had carried it with him every day since. I think, he said softly, this was our first miracle. Mia's eyes filled with tears, the good kind again, and she nodded, unable to find words big enough for the feeling blooming inside her. They left the cafe, stepping back into a world that felt somehow new. The river whispered beside them, carrying reflections of stars and hopes, and maybe even a little magic. Evan and Mia walked slowly, hand in hand, not hurrying toward anything, simply letting the night fold around them like a favorite storybook. And as they turned a corner, just before they said goodnight, they both looked up. A single shooting star streaked across the velvet sky, swift and brilliant, and gone too fast. But it was enough. They smiled at each other, wide and wonderstruck. No wishes needed. Everything they could have wished for was already right there, wrapped up in the quiet miracle of finding each other in a world that had felt so big, so lonely, for far too long. The night was breathing its last soft sighs, curling mist over the sidewalks, brushing cool fingertips against windows, against skin. Mia and Evan stood beneath an old oak tree, its bare branches stretching above them like quiet, sheltering arms. Neither wanted to say goodnight. Not really. Not when the night had woven itself around them, like a secret meant to last forever. Mia held the small painting from the street artist against her chest, feeling its tiny universe thrum against her heartbeat. Evan, hands deep in his coat pockets, shuffled his feet slightly, the way someone does when they have too much they want to say, and no words that feel big enough. Wait here, he said suddenly, voice soft but sure. Mia blinked, surprised, but nodded, her breath clouding the cold air between them. Evan jogged a few steps back toward the cafe they had just left, disappearing inside for a moment. Mia rocked gently on her heels, the night folding quietly around her, lamplight spilling golden puddles at her feet. When Evan returned, he held a small, folded piece of thick, cream-colored paper, edges a little frayed, as if it had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. I know we said no names, he said, his voice a low, tender thing, and maybe that still matters, but I wanted to leave you something, in case we never find each other again. He pressed the paper into her hand, his fingers brushing hers, sending a warm, aching shiver up her arm. Mia stared down at it, at the way the paper felt warm from his touch, like it had absorbed a little piece of his heart. Don't read it now, Evan said, smiling gently. Wait until tomorrow, when the sun comes up, when today is already a beautiful memory. Mia nodded slowly, clutching the letter carefully, like it might dissolve if she wasn't careful. They stood there, a few heartbeats longer, neither quite ready to step away. Then, with a final, slow smile, Evan leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead, light as a sigh, soft as a secret. Mia closed her eyes, breathing him in, the smell of rain and coffee, and something she already knew she would miss. And then he was gone. A step back, a wave, and he was swallowed by the night. Mia stood still, the letter cradled against her chest, feeling like she had just lived through a story she would carry inside her forever. She didn't move for a long time, listening to the river, the whisper of the leaves, the soft hush of the world exhaling. When at last she turned to go, the letter was tucked safely inside the pocket of her coat, close to her heart, where it belonged. She walked slowly, tracing the path back to her little apartment, every step echoing with the strange, sweet ache of endings and beginnings. Inside, she lit a single candle, placed the tiny galaxy painting on her bedside table, and sat curled in a blanket by the window, watching the stars blink sleepily overhead. The letter stayed tucked away for now, a quiet promise, waiting for the new day. She thought about him, about the way he had laughed, about the way he had listened, really listened, as if every word she spoke mattered. She thought about the way their hands had found each other without thinking, like puzzle pieces finally slipping into place. And she thought about the way the night itself had seemed to lean in closer around them, listening, hoping. Outside, somewhere across the sleeping city, Evan was looking up at the same stars, holding on to the same feeling, and neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. But tonight was theirs, a perfect, fleeting, endless moment, wrapped in the silver thread of destiny. And somewhere inside the folded letter, written in Evan's careful, slightly messy hand, were the words he hadn't dared to say aloud. Words that waited patiently for the morning, like tiny seeds ready to bloom in the new light. If you find this, if you still remember me, know that you changed everything in just one night. And wherever you are, I'll be looking for you. The first light of morning slipped quietly across the city, stretching pale gold fingers over rooftops, down sleepy alleyways, through windows still fogged with dreams. Mia stirred slowly under her blanket, the tiny galaxy painting still resting beside her, its soft colors catching the new light, looking almost alive. For a moment, she simply lay there, listening to the hush of early morning, the faint hum of distant traffic, the whisper of a world just beginning to wake. She touched the letter in her coat pocket, feeling its quiet weight against her heart, remembering the way Evan's hand had brushed hers, the way his eyes had looked when he gave it to her, like he was handing her something sacred. The memory made her chest ache, sweetly, painfully. She sat up slowly, the blanket pulling around her, her fingers tracing the edges of the folded paper as if it might tell her secrets just by touch. Outside the window, the sky was brushed in soft colors, lavender, blush pink, the last stars fading like sighs into the coming day. Mia took a deep breath and unfolded the letter. The paper crackled gently, the ink slightly smudged in places, as if Evan had pressed too hard, or maybe hesitated mid-thought, choosing every word with care. The first line was simple, and it made her heart stutter. "Good morning, wherever you are." She smiled, tears already prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, it means you stayed, at least a little longer. It means last night mattered to you too." Mia brushed a fingertip over the words, feeling the warmth of them bloom inside her chest. I don't know your name, and you don't know mine, but somehow that made it easier, didn't it? To be real, to be honest, to just be outside. A bird chirped once, twice, like a soft exclamation against the stillness. I have no idea where your life will take you from here, but I hope it's somewhere beautiful. I hope you find everything you dream of. And if you ever wonder, even for a moment, if you were seen, if you were understood, the answer is yes. Mia pressed the letter against her heart, blinking fast, the room around her shimmering softly, as if the world itself was breathing with her. You are unforgettable. There was a tiny space, a pause in the writing, as if Evan had sat back, stared out at the night, gathering the courage to write what came next. If somehow, someday, we find our way back to each other, I'll know you by your smile, by the way you looked at the stars as if they belonged to you. And even if we don't, I'm still grateful. Grateful for one night, one perfect moment that changed everything. Mia folded the letter carefully again, setting it beside the painting on her bedside table. Her heart felt full and fragile at the same time, like a delicate paper lantern floating higher with every breath she took. She stood slowly, moving to the window, resting her forehead against the cool glass. The city stretched out before her, shimmering in the new light, endless and wide, full of unseen paths and undiscovered corners. Anything could happen. Maybe today, maybe someday. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, the unknown felt like a promise, not a threat. A soft knock at the door startled her. She turned, heart leaping, the letter burning quietly against her ribs. Crossing the small room, she hesitated, hand on the doorknob, the world holding its breath around her. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was everything. She opened the door, and there, standing awkwardly in the hallway, hair a mess, coffee in one hand, hope shining shyly in his eyes, was Evan, still the same, and yet somehow new in the morning light. He smiled, the kind of smile that wrapped itself around your soul and made a home there. "Hi," he said, voice a little rough, a little hopeful. "I couldn't leave without seeing you again." Mia laughed, a soft, trembling sound, like a star finally exhaling, and without thinking, without doubting, she stepped forward into his arms. The city spun quietly around them, unnoticed. The morning stretched wide and endless before them, and somewhere deep inside her, Mia knew this was only the beginning. The hallway felt impossibly quiet, as if the whole world had decided to pause just for them. Evan's arms around Mia were warm, steady, trembling slightly in a way that made her chest ache with tenderness. For a long moment, they simply stood there, breathing each other in, wrapped in the soft hush of morning light. The coffee in his hand, forgotten, cooled slowly, sending little curls of steam into the space between them. When Mia finally pulled back, it was only far enough to look up at him, to really see him. Evan's eyes were the color of deep water, calm, endless, with a glint of something bright, something hopeful. Neither of them spoke right away. Words seemed too heavy, too loud for a moment so fragile, so sacred. Instead, Mia reached up, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. fingertips lingering longer than necessary, memorizing the way he felt, the way he existed. He caught her hand gently, weaving their fingers together, like stitching two separate pieces of sky into one. And then he smiled, not the polite kind, not the nervous kind, but the kind that cracks something open inside you, the kind that said, "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Do you?" He started, voice rough with sleep and emotion. "Want to go somewhere?" Mia laughed softly, a sound like sunlight through leaves, like the first note of a favorite song. "Anywhere," she whispered, "as long as it's with you." They left the building slowly, stepping into the early morning chill, breath misting in the golden air. The city was still waking up, stretching its arms wide, blinking sleepy lights into existence. Side by side, they wandered without direction, without urgency, letting their steps find their own rhythm, past little shops opening their doors, their windows fogged and glowing, past lampposts still clinging to their overnight light, casting long, delicate shadows on the cobblestone sidewalks, past a street musician strumming a quiet melody, a soundtrack for new beginnings. They ended up at a tiny park, hidden between old brownstones, where the grass was frosted with the last touch of winter. A carousel stood silent in the center, its painted horses frozen mid-dance, their bright colors dulled by the early hour. Without speaking, they sat on a worn wooden bench, shoulders brushing, hearts thundering softly in tandem. Evan pulled something from his pocket, small, crumpled, shy. It was a second letter, folded twice, edges worn from being carried, touched, maybe second-guessed. He held it out to her, his hand trembling just slightly. Mia took it, her fingers brushing his, and unfolded it slowly, carefully. Inside, in the same familiar, hopeful handwriting, were just a few simple words. "Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is where it all begins." Mia pressed the letter to her chest, eyes closing for a long, trembling moment. When she looked at him again, she saw it, not just the boy from last night, but the man who had stayed, the man who had chosen her, even in the light of day. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling him relax, breathe out, as if he had been holding the whole world in his lungs. The carousel creaked softly as the wind shifted, the horses looking almost alive in the morning mist. And there, in the tiny, hidden park, with only the city and the rising sun as witnesses, a universe bloomed quietly between them, one heartbeat at a time. The sky above them had begun to soften, the last traces of night retreating like a whispered secret, giving way to a new, golden morning, as if the world itself was taking a deep breath, waking gently from a long, peaceful sleep. Evan and Mia had been sitting on that same park bench for hours, the kind of hours that slip by unnoticed when you're wrapped in the comfort of someone's presence, their legs brushing, fingers intertwined, their breaths in perfect harmony. The city had come alive around them, the streets filled with the soft hum of morning rush, the scent of fresh pastries drifting from nearby bakeries, and the faint murmur of voices. But to them, everything seemed to fade away, as if this little corner of the world, with its quiet carousel and sleepy trees, was the only place that mattered. Mia's eyes fluttered closed for a moment, and the cool morning air kissed her skin, making her feel alive, but at the same time, at peace. The weight of the world lifted, or maybe it had simply become lighter, shared between them. Evan watched her with the same quiet adoration he'd felt the night before, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The smile of a man who had found something, not by chance, but by a quiet, persistent waiting, as if he'd known all along that this moment, this feeling, would arrive, one way or another. I never imagined it would be like this, he said softly, breaking the silence between them. His voice a low hum, barely a whisper, but it resonated in the stillness of the morning, as though his words had weight, meaning beyond what could be spoken. Mia turned to look at him, her eyes wide with something deep, something almost sacred. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She already knew. She felt it too, felt the magic in the space between them, the one that had always been there, only waiting for them to notice it. I didn't either, she replied quietly, her voice barely above the breeze. But somehow, here we are. Her eyes softened, searching his face as if trying to commit it to memory, as if she was afraid that the world might pull him away from her again, and she wouldn't be ready to let go. Evan took a deep breath, his hand still holding hers, the warmth of his skin grounding her, comforting her in a way that felt like home, like safety, like a promise. Maybe it was always supposed to be this way, he said, his voice full of a kind of tender certainty, like a man who had finally found something he hadn't known he was searching for. Maybe we just needed to wait long enough for it to come to us. Mia nodded, her heart in her throat, her mind swirling with thoughts she couldn't quite put into words. The only thing she knew for sure was that she was here with him, and this moment, this calm, perfect moment, felt like everything she had ever needed. There was no rush, no pressure, just the quiet knowledge that sometimes things don't need to be figured out, not all at once, not in the heat of the moment, but in the stillness, in the silence between heartbeats, in the way a person could sit with you for hours, and somehow everything made sense. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, the rhythm of his breath steady, soothing. "Do you think this will last, Evan?" she asked softly, almost unsure if she wanted to know the answer, but knowing that she did, in the depths of her heart. Evan chuckled softly, his hand brushing the top of her head, threading his fingers through her hair. "I don't know," he said, voice thick with affection. "But I do know that it's real, and that feels like enough." For a while, they sat in silence, letting the moment unfold, letting the city wake around them, letting the rest of the world fade into the distance. And then the carousel in the center of the park, which had been standing still for hours, creaked to life, the first turn of its wheels echoing through the quiet park like a soft promise. Mia looked up, surprised, and Evan followed her gaze. The carousel's music began to play softly, a lilting, nostalgic tune that felt like something from a dream, something distant, something timeless. She smiled, eyes sparkling with something unspoken. "Shall we?" she asked, her voice playful, a gentle challenge in her tone. Evan laughed, his heart lifting with hers. "Let's," he said, standing up and offering her his hand. They walked toward the carousel, their footsteps light, their laughter blending with the soft music, a quiet, gentle rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of the universe itself, as if everything was aligning, as if their journey had only just begun. When they climbed onto the carousel together, the world seemed to hold its breath for just a moment, and then, as the music swelled around them, they were carried away, up and down, in gentle arcs, spinning in perfect harmony with the world. The sun had risen fully now, painting the sky in shades of soft pink and golden yellow. And as they spun, they both realized that it didn't matter where they were, as long as they were together. The world, in that moment, felt infinite, and yet it felt as small as the space between their hearts, as if time itself had paused just for them, and in the soft, perfect rhythm of their spinning, with the music playing softly in the background, and the city waking up around them. They both knew this was only the beginning of something that would last, no matter where life took them.